What is good, my ex-homies? It's your boy, Jacob Gooden, and we're back. Another episode of the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. And I'm excited because I got a return guest. Tess Ulrey is back with us. And you may remember her from a couple months ago. And she is the director of the Coalition of Responsible Home Education. And if you haven't heard me talk about it, apparently you haven't been listening to the show, because I'm pretty sure I've shouted it out on like every episode since her episode and probably before that. So Tess, welcome back to the Ex-Homeschoolers Club.
Thanks so much for having me, Jacob. I'm happy to be here.
And today we're going to talk about some different things, because if you want to know Tessa's homeschool story, go back and listen to that episode, because that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're going to talk about legislation. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about things that are changing, things that are coming down the pipeline, and like how to get involved in making an impact on like current homeschool families. And so what better way to do it than have the director of the people actually putting forth some bills here to share what's going on. So Tess, let's start with this. For people who don't know what the coalition is, like walk us through what it is, what you guys do, and yeah, really just like that. What is it?
Yeah, so the Coalition for Responsible Home Education, we are a homeschool alumni founded and powered organization. Way back in 2013, a bunch of homeschoolers found each other on the internet, and that's where the Coalition for Responsible Home Education was born. What we do is advocate for responsible homeschooling oversight. We operate some programs that are really impactful for homeschool alumni. We do a lot of research that talks about homeschool outcomes. And for me, one of the most important things that we do is advocacy around making sure there are legislative guidelines that keep homeschooled children safe and ensure that they have access to resources as well.
Honestly, finding you guys and seeing what you guys were doing, that's what was so attractive, because yeah, I love telling my story of being a homeschool kid, but like knowing that there are people who want to make a difference for some of the things that maybe weren't so great for when I was a homeschool kid, and want to see changes like on like an actual legal level is really cool. And so so that's what attracted me at first to the coalition, or CRHE, as it's so much less of a mouthful to say that for sure. So let's talk about some victories, because you guys have announced some stuff recently. Some really big victories happened in Nebraska and in Connecticut. But let's talk about like what those are and how those are going to impact homeschooling families coming up here.
The structure, I guess, of all of the things that we recommend to state legislators as a part of our Make Homeschool Safe Act, a few key points of those were actually able to be enacted in 2 different states. And this is just absolutely incredible. And especially for people who kind of grew up, I think, in the homeschool world, are deeply familiar with the influence of certain advocacy groups in really taking away any legislative guardrail on homeschooling. So what was so exciting was this is the first time we saw movement forward that corresponds to that Make Homeschool Safe Act, which again is kind of that model legislation is what we hang all of our work on at CRHE. So seeing that happen both in Nebraska and Connecticut was absolutely fantastic this year. So in Nebraska, Senator Megan Hunt actually moved across not 1, but 2 really critical child safety measures in homeschooling. And then in Connecticut, absolutely remarkable, but Representative Leeper was able to take a House bill that originally had a lot more in it, right? But it actually moved Connecticut into being one of those states where we are going to have a registration system. So we even know how many children in Connecticut are homeschooled. And we've started having a really important conversation there about how to keep homeschooled kids safe as well.
You mentioned the Keep Homeschool Safe Act, or Homeschool Safety Act, or so let's talk about that a little bit, and like what that is, and some of maybe like the pillars of what that is, so that people understand like where we stand, where are we at with like what are we advocating for homeschool kids.
Absolutely. So the Make Homeschool Safe Act, it was published in 2024, and really some of the key pillars of that are that we want to know where these homeschooled kids are at. We want to make sure that there's a registration and kind of that floor level of accountability. You've heard me say it a lot, Jacob, but now there used to be 13, now there's 12 states that you don't even have to report to the state or local school district that you are homeschooling. So when we go into these states, we can't even tell you how many children are being homeschooled. So we really want there to be some kind of registration, some accountability system. We'd also like to see, to ensure homeschooled children's open future, that there's a system in place of educational assessments as well as safety measures as well. One of the concerning parts when we look at the worst outcomes of homeschooling is that homeschooling can be so uniquely and totalitarianism in terms of its isolation, right? That we're worried about children not having access to mandated reporters. The reality is the child welfare system grew up alongside the public school system. So when children are removed from a school system, they are just not seen by as many adults. So we want to have checks and balances in place to make sure children are seen by mandated reporters. We also want to make sure that they're being homeschooled by safe people. There are now 47 states where you can be convicted of a crime against children and still be allowed to homeschool your own children. Nebraska was one of those states that actually moved across. We'll talk about that a little bit. I get really excited about this part of it. And then the final piece, the Make Homeschool Safe Act, is advocating for increased resources for homeschooled children as well. There's a variety of reasons to homeschool, and whatever those reasons are, we still believe that it's important legislatively that children have access to sports, to libraries, to IEP programs, and all those other services that run through a public school system.
As I re-entered into like understanding my homeschool life and asking questions about it, and even like calling my mom and being like, okay, so like from a legal perspective, like what did you have to do? Like what were you required? And then talking to other people, I realized one, every state is so vastly different with the requirements, with the assistance that's there, with like all of the laws associated with it. And like to your point, you said it, there's 47 states that you can be some kind of child sex offender and still pull your kids out of school and homeschool them. Most people would say common sense says that's a bad idea. And so the fact that it's that's possible is crazy. The fact at the state I grew up in, California, my mom always talks about she had 1 week to file a piece of paper that just said I'm homeschooling my children. That was it. She never had to report any test scores. We didn't have to do standardized testing. Like we were on our own in a lot of capacities, and that's kind of wild when you think about it. Even now, like talking to her, she's like, "Yeah, that's a little crazy that's like our government just let us do that." And so it's again, it's not necessarily always about, my understanding at least is like it's not really about like trying to enforce or like create these insane boundaries and laws that have to like be followed to a T that make homeschooling like that much harder. It's really just like creating an environment where like all kids that are home educated can succeed and like be able to launch really well and like be accounted for. And like your point, like access to mandated reporters and things like that are already in the school systems. Like I think we can make some real difference in a lot of those things. And so, so yeah, maybe let's talk about Nebraska and what changed there and why it's such a big victory, and then we'll talk about Connecticut.
Yeah, so Nebraska LB1224 was what was passed in Nebraska, and it's helpful also to understand that part of our work at CRHE, of course, we're advocating for the Make Homeschool Safe Act, and a lot of that is influenced by a project that we have called Homeschooling's Invisible Children. This is a database of, frankly, the worst outcomes of homeschooling. And the reality is we have over 500 cases documented there where homeschooled children had horrific outcomes. The reason we do that, though, is because you can find patterns and you can identify trends, and ideally then you can put legislation into place to make sure that these things don't happen. So there's two key findings on Homeschooling's Invisible Children database that were actually addressed in LB1224. The first is that one of the key indicators for horrific abuse and neglect in a homeschooling setting is a child being withdrawn from the public school system during an active CPS investigation. The second piece of that is that perpetrators that are previously convicted of crimes have a higher likelihood of being perpetrators again towards these homeschooled children. And so LB1224 actually, as much as they can, begins to address some of these things. So LB1224, if a child is the subject of a DCF investigation, they have to remain in school for 14 days before they're withdrawn to be homeschooled. The reason that's so important is because they retain access to mandated reporters, and it also puts a bit of a speed bump in terms of that reactive withdrawal. LB1224 also prevents individuals with, again, those crimes against children from homeschooling. And really what it does is it means that if you have enough of a criminal conviction that you could not work at a school, you can't also homeschool your children.
that seems like common sense to me. But like again, I don't know. Some of these things, like they just, as I was getting connected with you and with what the coalition is doing, there were certain things that I was like blew my mind as far as the fact that it's like, is this not just common sense? Is this not just like you were saying, if you can't work at a school, then why would you be able to homeschool your child? That seems like pretty obvious to me. But again, I guess we haven't been that smart for to actually create something around that. And maybe that has to do with like, you know, homeschooling, even though it has been around for quite a while now, it still is to some degree a relatively new thing. And then as you mentioned before, there are some advocacy groups who very much advocate for kind of a no uh, no restrictions policy on anything homeschooling. So I'm sure that plays somewhat of a role in that as well.
It does. And, I think that, it's difficult when the sentiment is so heavily, hands off, hands off homeschooling. The children who need these regulations most, and the children who need some of these safety measures, are swept up into that as well. And so one of the most powerful pieces of testimony I thought that came out of Nebraska was, a homeschool alumni who said, the children who need these laws are not here. The children who need these laws are not here advocating in the Capitol. The children who need these laws are effectively invisible. And it was really powerful to hear her say that, of course, based on her own homeschooling story, but also just the reality of being an adult and caring for all children in a community.
I think that's something that is a little bit different about what you guys do is there's an emphasis on creating like somewhat of like rights for children in a lot of senses. And, a child's right to be educated and have access to mandated reporters and things like that, to have access to test scores potentially, like things like that, where it's like, I just spoke with a lady who's in France, and she was telling me how at her kid's school, there's a big sign on the wall, and it goes through all of the things that all of the kids have the right to do. Education, they have the right to be who they are. They have the right to a mandated reporter. They have all these things, right? And it's on the wall clearly for all of those kids to read. And I was like, that would never happen in the States. We're a little too individualistic, and I think we put a little bit more, as a personal opinion, but I think we put a lot more emphasis on parental rights than we do on rights of kids a lot of times. And so maybe we could shift things a little bit. Hopefully, some of these bills will do that. So,
and it's not lost on me too when I say, I'm so proud of Nebraska and I have to give Nebraska a shout out here. They actually passed this legislation. They passed this legislation. They are always on a bipartisan basis, but it was unanimous as well. So I think that's really important to see, because when we are able to shift that narrative to like, hey, these children have rights too. Even though again the U.S. will not sign on to the U.N. Convention on the Rights of the Child, at least on a state by state basis, we can start to make some of this change.
Yeah. Well, I like what you said there too. It's not really, it shouldn't be an issue of left or right, Democrat versus Republican. I think that our kids can be something that we universally come together and say what's best for all kids, and that's something that hopefully both sides can get on board with, because that's a messaging point that both sides bring up a lot is kids and the protections of kids. So it's like, hey, this shouldn't be something we fight that much about. We should actually be able to work towards some solutions there.
The reality is that homeschooling's always been its own little subculture anyway, so we can't even lock ourselves into one of those camps.
Right.
And I find that happens more and more in the advocacy that we do, is that we truly are in a space of our own.
Yeah. Is there anything else in Nebraska that you want to touch on, or should we talk about Connecticut?
Yeah. Like I said, Nebraska was great for some of those, like, again, floor level accountability kind of systems. Nebraska already has homeschooled children, at least register, and we kind of know where they are in Nebraska. So this is really, this is a step up for Nebraska, even though they were already making some effort. So, but yeah, happy to talk about Connecticut too.
Yeah, let's dive into it. So, HB 5468. Man, I feel like we need a new naming system. I know why we name things the way we do, but man, man, oh man, I'm like, yeah. So if other people, Tess sent me an email with like, hey, here's all the things that are kind of coming down the line, and I was like, this is just letters and numbers to me. But but Connecticut, what is changing in Connecticut, and what does that victory look like?
Yeah, so Connecticut before this year has been one of those wildly unregulated states that we talk about.
Okay.
And when we say unregulated, I mean nobody has to know if you are homeschooling. You also get no resources from the state if you are homeschooling, right? Like that's on both sides of the coin. And what's really exciting about Connecticut is that they, with HB 5468, letters and numbers all the time, right? This the state of Connecticut is actually going to basically move up a category, not be super unregulated anymore, because they're at least going to start to register and figure out where these homeschoolers are. So again, it's not lost on me. This doesn't sound like a big step, but it truly is, because this is the first step that states take towards accountability. Connecticut also decided because of some really horrific cases in Connecticut that they needed to do something as well to address this kind of phenomenon of suspicious withdrawal to, quote unquote homeschool. So what Connecticut also did is that when children are being withdrawn to be homeschooled, not only are we going to know where they are, but there's basically just a quick cross check to make sure that that child is not the subject of an active DCS investigation, and also make sure that the adults in the house are also not part of an investigation as well. So it is by no means, it's not opening up a DCF case. It's nothing like that is happening, but it is, it's effectively a background check is what's happening. The same as in a public school system.
So now that registration is becoming more normalized in states, like what does that actually do? What does that accomplish for you guys? What does it accomplish for the government? Like, and for kids, what does it actually do?
Centering children and making children kind of the first part of this always, it is basically a floor level accountability measure to make sure that the parents who are in charge of their education are at least reporting that out, and making sure that it's their education, their right to an open future is not just an afterthought. It's something that actually needs to be taken responsibility for every single year. So that's an incredibly important part of a registry and why that happens. For policymakers, it's critical to have good data too. Homeschooling it can be an absolute lightning rod in a state legislature. And what I've seen in my brief experience is that it's even more of a lightning rod when we can't tell you how many children are being homeschooled, right? So a policymaker that comes in and says, hey, I want to be a part of this sort of responsible homeschool reform, are they talking about 5,000 kids in their state, or are they talking about 50,000 kids in their state, or are they talking about 5 million?
Right. We don't know.
What a wild place to come from,
Yeah.
right? And then additionally for child welfare workers and for people who work in those systems of support, it's incredibly important to know just where these children are. So when things happen, when additional support is needed for families, or when, again, some of these horrific outcomes are happening as well, there's at least a way and kind of a web that we can help prevent some of these terrible outcomes.
Well, I would also assume too that some of this data can be used also to research like positive outcomes, right? Of like, if it's working, like, we're going to be seeing families hopefully register repeatedly, right? To be homeschooling their kids. They're not going back into the school system. Why is that? And then is that kid then able to launch? Like, I mean, I'm looking maybe big picture here, kind of a thing, but I think it serves two purposes, right? It serves the protection aspect of it as well, but also it can be a good indicator because we hear repeatedly over and over and over, or at least I did. I grew up with this very strong sense that it was like homeschooling was better because you were more likely to get into college. You were more likely to be smarter than public school kids. You were more likely to X, Y, Z. Like you were God's gift to the earth. And I don't know. I'm very average when it comes to my intelligence. And so, I was able to get in college and things like that. But it definitely was something that, like, where's that data coming from? How do we know that that's actually accurate? And I know that that's not 100% of what you guys are doing, but maybe it can give some kind of a baseline of at least understanding that it's like to your point, there is X number of homeschoolers in our state. And so maybe also to put some significance on, do we actually need to be enacting laws around this? Because if, 20% of your state is homeschooling their kids, that's a significant number. Probably should have some say in what that does. And I know 20% is probably a large number for most states. I know it's still kind of a niche thing, but we are shifting.
We could get there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that outcomes piece is critical, right? Because even though we say all the time homeschooling is increasing, which we know it does, but to be honest, that's also a best guess as well, right? Part of that is just we know less children in the public school system.
Right.
Kind of to your point, what exactly does that mean? And like a piece of our work too is in research, because there are those studies and those outcomes of homeschoolers. I mean, I definitely heard them too. Individual exceptionalism is real in in some of these conversations, but also, you know, those are self-reported. Those are the families who are already invested and kind of an active part of this are who's delivering that data. We don't even know what percentage of that data it is because we can't tell you how many there were in the first place.
The other thing that I was going to note about these two bills is very much that like these are, to your point, these are welfare bills. These are about like welfare of these kids, welfare, and making sure that they're safe. I know you had mentioned in the pillars of what you guys do, you also work on some bills that maybe are like access to things, right? Kids have access to sports or libraries or, educational resources. And so I'm curious, like bills like that. I know that there've been a couple this year that have kind of stalled on the floor, or maybe they're dead completely, and those tend to be maybe more in that vein. Could we talk about that a little bit and maybe why those stall a little bit more than like something like a welfare bill would do?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting when we come out of legislative season when, you know, in one state we're working on a bill that is, you know, kind of, again, very child welfare centered, making sure children are safe, criminals should not be homeschooling kind of a bill. And then we flip the script and we say, you know, hey, let's get them into public sports as well. So it's an interesting kind of dichotomy of just ways that we're talking about things. But the reality is that it's all about children's rights to an open future and to access. So um, we did work in a couple states this year. The most work actually in Maryland about some of these really important resource bills. And for us, those resource bills mean that homeschoolers are allowed to access public school sports and extracurriculars. In some cases, like testing and AP courses as well. And then while it wasn't a part of our bills in Maryland, in the past we have worked on pieces of legislation that would ensure that children have the right to, whether it's IEP kind of services through their school district. And to me, what's so interesting about this is I feel like this is a slam dunk for a legislator, right? To say, absolutely, let me get all the kids in my, you know, let me get all of my constituents the ability to play sports. We're not mandating anybody play sports. I know as a kid, I absolutely would not have played sports if it was offered to me. I love the idea of kids being able to do it though. So, so again, to me, it feels like a slam dunk for a legislator. And the roadblocks we come up against are really interesting because there's an aspect of, you know, kind of this like deeply conservative homeschooling movement, which we're all familiar with, that doesn't want any of that kind of crossover and views it as a door to, I guess, a door to additional oversight, regulation, accountability. And then we also face a little bit of pushback, actually quite a bit of pushback sometimes from, you know, public school teachers as well, and individuals who are involved in the school system. So it's an interesting spot for us to be in the middle of this, to say, let's center the children and their, I guess, again, just their rights to access in this, even though we're kind of, you know, hearing it from both sides.
I could understand the argument being made of like, well, there's, like you have your community centers and like the town I grew up in, it's like when I wanted to play soccer, like I didn't go to the public school. I joined through the community center, right? And so I played on teams with other public school kids. But now looking back on it, like I recognize like my parents paid for that, and not every parent has the ability to do that. And sports in general is expensive, even if you do it through the public school system, because you still got to pay for cleats and, all the, the sports gear itself. Right. But like, I've kind of come around on it because even when you guys like first brought that up and one of the conversations I either had with you guys or in sitting in on a session, at first I was like, yeah, I don't really see the point of this, like at all. Like this seems like a waste of energy in a lot of ways. And now I've kind of started to come around on it to your point of it's like, well, it's not about we're going to mandate that kids have to do sports or have to be in an extracurricular. It's more of if they want to be, can we give them access to those things, and I'm sure that goes for more than just sports, right? You said extracurriculars in general. So what else falls under that category?
Honestly, a little bit of it state by state, district by district. That can be, sometimes that can be band, that can be theater. Some of those other access points, I live in a rural corner of Michigan, where a lot of times the only library that is available is the public school library. So even things like that are part of this like resource access type of conversation. It's really important for some states, especially without robust transcript capabilities, that homeschoolers can go and take those AP tests as well, because they're going to need something on their transcript to turn around and to show to a university to say, hey, no, I can perform at this level. And I think that, again, for us, centering the children, we believe they have a right to this type of access. And, it's also not lost on us that the more safe adults they're around, whether that is coaches, whether that is teachers, is important for our welfare piece as well.
Is there not, to some degree, also a fear of like, if homeschool kids get let into public school sports or extracurriculars, that they would then come in and dominate that? Does it open up like the ability for homeschool parents to be coaches or, theater or, whatever it is? Does it open them up for that too? Or like, how does that work?
That's a common question that's brought up even to us in testimony and stuff. And part of what Dr. Stewart did was actually run some numbers even on like the percentage of children that you could assume would even join this. And I'm going to be honest, it's negligible. It would be, not, we'll use football as an example. Not every kid in the public school system is on your football team. I promise you, not every homeschooler is also going to join, is also going to join your football team. And so I think that it's district by district, state by state. There are guidelines that they've put in around this. There are 38 states that allow this right now. And so within those 38 states, some of those guidelines are like, it has to be in the home district they're zoned for. And there's kind of these other ways they're able to shape that so that it works for a community. And I think that's another important piece of this legislation too, right? It's like, hey, what does work in your community to make sure that all the children in your community can play together?
That's a good point of like, you kind of have to some degree, do it on a case by case basis of like, what is going to work for your community, because every community is different. Every neighborhood has like I'm sure the percentages of homeschool families in those neighborhoods vary differently, and so, yeah, it's like also how many kids in public school want to play sports. If you're already struggling to bring people on the team, it might be worth it to try to go get a couple of the homeschool families to come play football or soccer or any baseball or anything like that. So,
and honestly, in some rural districts, if they want their wrestling team, they need a couple more kids. That's the only way that's the only way that's going to happen. So personally, I live in Michigan, which again is one of those very, very unregulated states, and we don't allow homeschoolers typically to participate unless it's kind of on a coach by coach decision. And so it's interesting. Part of what I, kind of was compelled to start work on CRHE with actually falls a little bit in this vein. I coach a kids running program at my local elementary school, and I have homeschoolers on my team. I'm happy to have homeschoolers on my team. I understand them. I mean, it's kind of a neat like connection point, but the elementary school across town does not allow homeschoolers to participate on their team just because.
Mm-hmm.
And that's me. It's just because, Coach Tess says,
yeah,
sure, I can take an extra kid or two.
Right. Exactly.
And I don't think it should be up to me. I mean, that's my problem. I don't think it should be up to me. I think it needs to be consistent.
No, I'm with you. I think what's interesting too is like kind of also to the point of like the way that schools are structured. I think about like, my homeschool prom was not in a basement, and I didn't go with my mom. I actually went to a prom. I went to two different proms, but they were tied to private schools. But the private schools were so small that their prom would have been 20 kids, something like that. And so actually having the homeschool community come in, they were able to double and sometimes triple those numbers because, well, it helped pay for nicer events. Like we got to go to a golf course, or we got to be on a paddle boat, or whatever, whatever the thing was. We got to have an actual dinner because all of a sudden you could actually make it worthwhile and more affordable for people as well. Because all of a sudden you don't have to pay $100 to go to prom. Now you can just, pay 50 or 40 or whatever it was. And so I think that was definitely, it's not the public school, but it definitely, I remember there being aspects of particularly private schools in our area being like very open to having homeschool kids come and be part of what was happening there, because they just didn't have the numbers to make things actually like successful in a lot of ways. And in the same way, my homeschool community, to some degree, we opened up certain things to public and private school kids. We did dances, a lot of like swing and ballroom and cotillion dances and stuff like that. Um, and so we would invite those people in as well. They had to come as guests, but it
Yeah.
still was like we were some of us in particular were pushing much more for like, let's have these people come in and have fun with us because they let us go have fun with them.
Like an even bigger level. I think part of why I like advocating for these resource and access bills and why I think it's important is I think there's a genuine like destigmatization that has to happen on both sides of this conversation. I think it is only helpful when we have, again, either homeschool kids are going to public school or public school kids are going into homeschoolers, right? Um, I think that children now maybe won't have the same type of reaction maybe that you and I have when we say to people, I was homeschooled. For whatever stereotype that is, right? And there's so much, especially in advocacy, there's so much fear on both sides of this conversation between the public school and between homeschoolers. It's I think this is a really productive way for us to just start working together a little bit better.
Yeah. No, and totally. And to your point of like, yeah, the reaction of like, I remember as a kid, like the worst thing to hear was like when you told somebody I'm a homeschool kid, and they would say, "Ah, that makes sense." I hated that. It made me feel so just like nasty inside. I just was like, oh, like I'm the weirdo. Like it made me feel like an outcast. What's funny now is that like I will go and I'll meet current homeschool families and out and about, or I've worked a couple jobs where I have to interact with people or whatever, and it'll come up and I'll be like, oh yeah, like I was a homeschool kid too, and they're like, oh, that's so cool, like whatever. And it's like the opposite effect of like and I'm able to maybe kind of do that for people too, where I'm like, not like I don't come at it from a shock to like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. No, it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, tell me about that. And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
so, but the whole structure around it, I feel like even coming from public school kids, it's so different now. It's like actually like a little bit more normalized, I think, in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, so maybe those
Yeah.
stigmas are going away.
Yeah. And I would love it to, if we're not coming into some of these like legislative conversation, thinking like public schools are terrible, evil, horrific places. And,
Yeah.
I like, again, just on both sides of that.
Yeah. I think there's a world in which yeah, I'm a huge believer that public, private, and home education, which I guess technically kind of falls under private as well, is like I think that they can all work together, and I think for the betterment. And it's just like it really also stems from a place of like nobody needs to come at it from like I'm better than you. It's like, different, everyone's got their favorite, right? And everybody's
Yeah.
got their thing that like works better for their family, their child, those types of things. And so I think that there's just right scenarios for right people, and it's figuring out what those are. So why not make all of them operate really well? And then that way it's easier to plug people in where it's like, this is going to work best for my kid or my family or, any of those scenarios.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's talk about is there anything coming up? Are there any bills still on the floor that are still getting passed through, or anything you guys are working on maybe for next legislation season? I know it's still we're kind of in that season still, but like what's coming up?
Yeah, so the majority of states are, winding down their legislative season, but we're really excited about some legislation coming out of Rhode Island as well, which will, again, begin to address that suspicious withdrawal component of homeschooling. So we're excited to do some advocacy around that bill as well, and been in touch with a couple other leaders in other states that are excited about, I guess, you know, making sure that homeschool children are prioritized next legislative season. And so I'm so excited that they're proactively reaching out to us now, and we're able to sort of begin these conversations because, advocacy, legislative change it's a marathon and not a sprint. We started talking to both alumni and legislators about the Connecticut piece way back in October. That's how long it took for us to get, to get across the finish line. And so we are working, like I said, actively. We still have an opportunity in Rhode Island. Their legislative season doesn't close until the end of June. So we'll still be active. We'll still be active there for now, and really, really gearing up for next year as well.
The other thing I was going to ask you too is like if something passes and goes into action in a state, does it become easier to show that as example to other states to say, hey, this is working? Or like I don't I don't know. Like I always think about it like my uncle and I who talk politics all the time. We always talk about
Are
like,
you going
well,
to say
if they
slippery
just
slope to me? Don't say slippery slope to me.
not a slippery
I'm
slope.
just kidding.
I was gonna say like we always talk about like if we were to just put in action some piece of like whether it's like a socialist idea or whether it's like whatever, it's like whatever political idea. If we just put it into action in one state and see and give it some time to operate and see if it works or not, does it then become more valuable to other states to look at that and say, oh, this is working for that state. We could try that here as well and see if it works for us? Like with these bills that are getting passed in this legislation that's happening, if it is working, if it starts to work, does it become easier for you guys to go to other states and say, hey, look we're doing this for homeschoolers over here. It's working. The results are paying off. Would you guys be interested in something like that? Or are they really not receptive to that kind of a thing?
I hope so. And to be completely honest, this is some of the first major legislation that CRHE has passed.
Okay.
And it's also, I, I'm also not even a year into this position. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to like, yeah. So I'm excited to see how I'm able to take these like legislative wins and kind of like, make them grow and go into other states. But in general, yes, I do believe that there's a lot of value in passing something in one state and it's sort of like rippling out and that kind of effect happening. What I'm particularly proud of, I guess, this legislative season is that we were able to pass something in Nebraska, middle of the country. I'm Midwestern myself, and we were able to do something on the East Coast. I think regionally those are very, very different places, but I think it speaks to how important this work is. And even thinking about like, what does one state do that influences another state? Senator Hunt, who introduced this legislation in Nebraska, she modeled it after Rayleigh's Law in West Virginia. And so West Virginia, Rayleigh's Law, really, really compelling story to look up about homeschool reform. But Delegate Fluharty has tried for the last 7 years to get this legislation across the finish line and it is continuously shot down. And what Rayleigh's Law does is basically, again, prevents that suspicious withdrawal because Rayleigh Browning died because of suspicious withdrawal. They can't get it across the finish line in Nebraska, in West Virginia. But what Nebraska did is they said, hey, look at what's happening over there. Look at how important this is. And we don't have to wait for an absolutely tragic case for us to enact this in our own community. And so they worked ahead that way.
Yeah.
Truly because of West Virginia.
That's good to hear that it's like, because I think, like I think sometimes we view, especially as state rights get pushed a lot more and more, which I think is important. It is one of those things where I think some states are much more receptive to looking at what's working other places or being proactive, like you were saying, and saying we can do this better before somebody else, or at the same time, or even following after somebody, and saying, yeah, we can make this change now. And so hearing that there's legislators that are wanting to do that is good, because I think, again, a lot of what we're talking about is politics, and right now I think a lot of people are disenfranchised with politics and not feeling like political leaders are actually like doing things that are in the best interest for their constituents. So it is good to hear that that's not always the case. There are good things that are coming out of our states, particularly to protect kids. So
yeah, and when a legislator fights really hard in one state for children, no matter the outcome, it does inspire somebody else too. And so it worked for, again, Delegate Fluharty's work is really, has a tremendous amount of credit for the Nebraska, for the Nebraska legislation getting across the finish line. Wyoming did the same thing this year. Carly Provenza picked it up and said, hey, I see what West Virginia tried to do. I see what worked in Nebraska. I'm going to do it too.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Is there any other bills? I'm looking at our notes. I see that you've got a couple federal bills listed here as well. Do you want to talk about those and why CRHE is like backing or supports those bills, and then what they actually are and how they would impact? Because I'm assuming a federal bill is like, that's nationwide, right?
It is. And so it's sometimes hard for us to be a part of federal conversations because education and frankly child welfare operates on such a state by state basis.
Right.
So we saw an opportunity with it's called the Homeschool Graduation Recognition Act. We saw an opportunity to kind of encourage, I guess, utilize that Homeschool Graduation Recognition Act to encourage individuals at the federal level to take some ownership and some responsibility for what what the homeschool experience all the way up to graduation looks like in their state. So what the Homeschool Graduation Recognition Act does is basically just enshrines that, especially for federal student aid, whatever the requirements for homeschool graduation in your state are, that has to be accepted by those aid programs. It also has to be essentially like accepted by a university. The reason for us that was so important to support is because we have heard time and time again from all the alumni that we talk to how many hurdles they had to get how many hurdles they had to go through to get into college. Like I said in my last episode with you, I was homeschooled by a teacher. So she was very, very adamant that I had a, real transcript. I had standardized tests. I had that all together. But to be frank, my experience is relatively unique in the homeschool community. And so even though there is a ton of work to be done on that entire way up to graduation, the reality is that we don't want to put any more roadblocks into place for children who are graduating out of homeschooling. Should there be more accountability up to that level? Absolutely, there should be. But the reality is that kids aren't going to stop graduating from homeschooling right now. So it's important for us, even though this bill does not address what happens before, to support what happens now as well. And it did open up some really amazing channels for us in terms of federal conversations, right? About talking to senators, talking to Congress people about, they've heard about homeschooling, right? But do they actually understand what that means in their state?
That's huge because, yeah, to your point of like the transcripts and like getting into college, like, I mean, I'm so thankful. I also had a mom who was like, the whole goal was like, if my kid wants to go to college, like, we're going to make sure that kid gets to college. And so we're going to make sure there's transcripts and there's documentation of all of those types of things. I have friends, their parents did not do that for them. And so, for them to get into school was a lot harder because they were either playing catch up to try to build it themselves. They were trying to, talk to mom and dad about like, what did we actually do and how did we do it, and build it all. And, in a much shorter time frame than like we had a lot of that documented. And so even though we did end up going to somebody who helped us format and make sure it looks proper for college acceptance and that kind of thing, it was like a lot easier because we really were able to walk in with a stack of papers and say, here's this, help us know what is important to document here. And so, and I know that there are people out there who help with those things in each state, and it's a state by state basis, but that document is actually so significantly important of like whether it's your transcripts, but also like you were saying, like states recognizing like and accepting homeschool graduation as like a legitimate thing is like so massive. Because those things, even if down the line, even if you don't go to college, down the line, you could still need paperwork like that to like get a job. Even they might ask you about, your high school education and grade school and stuff like that. So it is really important to have all that documented.
Yeah, and again, just acknowledging that it is not. We know that the system isn't perfect to getting up to graduation, right? But and there was, and I know that. In CRHE supporting this bill, to be frank, I understand there was some pushback in the, especially in the homeschool alumni community about us supporting a bill like this. But for us, it really was about, again, if we need to reframe this conversation, not on parents' rights, but if we are reframing this whole conversation to be on children's rights and children's experience and children's access to an open future, we cannot put a roadblock in place for them.
And then to your point too, it opens up those conversations with those legislators that maybe you didn't have access to before to actually make some of those changes down the line on a more federal level, or at least get access to some of the states that maybe it's just harder to get into, or, anything. You never know. It's all a networking thing, right? At the end of the day, it's who you know, kind of a thing. So is there any other legislation we want to touch on before? Because I want to also ask you some questions around how people can get involved. But is there any other legislation you want to touch on before we move on to that?
So those are really the big ones that are coming. One other victory I'll share with you, which I think is, it's next door to homeschooling, right? Is that New Hampshire decided not to enshrine parents' rights in their constitution. And to me, we did some advocacy around this as well. But to me, that was just an interesting step to see, right? Because what we're seeing is states like Texas who have decided to add parents' rights through a resolution into their constitution. And New Hampshire actually decided not to this legislative season. And so even though I think New Hampshire is moving in a direction where they might be deregulating some things about homeschooling, it's just really interesting to me that they still chose not to. It wasn't the parents' rights part of it that they were comfortable with.
Yeah, to your point, I think it's very, very interesting it's very clear sometimes where certain things are taking place. In if you watch
Because regionally,
particular
it's
states,
so, yeah.
it's like vastly different. Of like sometimes, like to your point, you're like, so you're deregulating all this stuff, but yet this you're not comfortable with. Why is that? And like, yeah, that is such an interesting perspective on that as well. Okay, let's touch on how we get involved, because I think, aside from, I'm sure money is always great to be able to support you guys. If you have a link, I'm going to make sure there's a link down below too if people want to support you guys financially. But aside from that, what from homeschool alumni specifically can we do for you? What are you guys looking for?
Thank you for bringing the financial component. We are a 501c3. So, and I think I have told you before, we operate at 0.01% of what the big homeschool anti-regulation lobby does. So I just like to throw that out there to people when they're understanding really, the tremendous amount of effort that is being put in by those alumni, by those volunteers to get these bills moved ahead. When that's the type of resources that we're working with.
Yeah. So all the sugar daddies and all the sugar mamas who are listening to this, link down below. Go support.
Perfect. Thank you.
The people who are rolling in it right now. Let's make some things happen. Yeah. For those of us who maybe our pockets are a little bit tighter, how do we get involved? What do we need from us?
Yeah, so the alumni stories is really a critical part of this conversation, because every single piece of legislation we are advocating for from a children's rights perspective. Now, we were the homeschooled children, right? And so we have the stories and we have the voices now that are so important to bring forward in this conversation. Especially, I think, the further we get past our homeschooling experiences, the more our frontal lobes close and we realize all of the reasons our parents had, all of the maybe challenges and supports that were available. I truly think the homeschool alumni are the most important voice in this conversation. So there's lots of ways to get involved with that. At CRHE, we do a lot. We kind of work on both sides of bills. There's a lot we do beforehand to get a legislator ready to bring this to the floor. We need to convince these legislators that this is important. We need to give them the tools and support that they need to effectively tell our stories to their other legislators. And then we need to make sure that people understand why this is important. Once the bill is introduced, then we need support as well. And again, those direct stories and those direct voices. And so at our website, and it's our Voices for Reform program that we have, there's ways that you can participate in that, both before a bill is introduced and while a bill is being debated. The testimony options, it's if you get plugged into us through that Voices for Reform program, I send out all sorts of emails that are like, hey, we're exploring this in this state. There's easy ways that you can just sign on to a letter that we're doing. You can give us a sentence or two and I'll add that into testimony. But if you feel particularly compelled, and especially if you are either a resident of the state we were working in or you were homeschooled in that state, your voice, and if you're willing to be a part of either, submitted written testimony, there's also opportunities to a lot of times testify virtually. And kind of the best thing and the most effective thing you can do is come out to a state capitol with me. I love bringing homeschool alumni out to state capitals with me. It's a huge lift, but I can't tell you how impactful it is for legislators to see us and to hear us and to talk to us in person. And the bills that we moved across the floor this time, both in Nebraska and in Connecticut, I have to be honest, it's because homeschool alumni were there and in person with me.
Yeah, I think that's like, again, that's one of the reasons I started this show, was the fact that I came to the realization in like 2020 that I was like, our stories are important. And I had been talking to friends and we've been talking about homeschool life and like what it was like and what we had, like, now that we were almost 10 years removed from it, like what was going on in our brains of like, did mom and dad fail us? Did they succeed? How was it successful? All of those things. And so to your point of like, our frontal lobe was like finishing developing. It's like we could look at it a lot more objectively, I think, than like right when we had gotten out. Right at 18 years old, when I was fresh out of it, the first thing I wanted to do was just like not be associated with homeschooling anymore. And because I was scared of that, like, oh, that makes sense. Like, I just didn't want to hear that anymore. So I just would always tell people I'm private schooled, and I went to a very small school, very elite kind of thing. Little did people know.
Yes.
Well, some people sniffed it out pretty quickly, but but now as those stories are coming forward, like to your point, I think they do make a difference, right? Because in a couple different ways. For what my show does, it really, I think, gives us a sense of community to know that we're not alone in what we experienced, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, right? But the reason I wanted to have you come back on and talk about what's going on is because those stories not only can be impactful for our community and feeling seen, but also we can now actually use those stories to make actual impact that will impact like current and future generations of homeschool kids. That's like huge. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like such a bigger, life goal in a lot of ways that we could be a part of that. And so again, yeah, I think it's great. People get connected. Links will be down below because yeah, testimony is absolutely phenomenal. I know I've signed on to a couple bills, or at least one of them, to throw my name on there. But yeah, when you guys do something in California, let me know because I will raise my hand. I'll be the first one in line to say anything you want me to.
Yeah, and that is, and I think that's also, we are working in these states and we send out these calls to action, but especially if people feel very compelled about the Make Homeschool Safe Act, about whether it's the whole thing or maybe there's one piece of that that really stands out to you. Legislative change can start to happen with you. I am not always the best person to talk to your state representative because I've got an address in DC and they don't care, right? But if one of their constituents can reach out and say, hey, make an introduction, here's an organization you should look at, they're trying to do something that is truly the first step and could make all the difference in your state.
Good to know, because I think that's again one of the things, like it is really that, like, where do I start? How do I get involved? And so yeah, knowing that it's like, hey, maybe I should just call my representative for my state or my childhood state or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I've got all those scripts as well. And so if people ask me for it, I'm happy to. We can converse via email. We can even do a quick call. But it's been really tremendous to open up some doors. Again, your representative works for you. You
Right.
need to talk to them. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's important. And yeah, and to your point, people get on the email list too, because yeah, like Tess was saying, I get emails all the time from you guys. That's like, hey, we're doing this. Do you want to sign on to it? Do we're looking for people who are doing XYZ. And so, it's not an all the time thing. Like, it's not it's not a full-time job for you. It is a full-time job, but like, for us, it's not a full-time job to have to go advocate for those things. It can take 5-10 minutes. I've written a couple things for you guys, and it literally took me 5 minutes to just jot down a few thoughts. It's like, it's not that big of a deal. But it can make a huge impact. And so, that's important to know. So any other ways we can get involved locally? Sign up with you guys, get on the newsletter, give them some support. Yeah. If you've got the money, throw a couple bucks their way as well. But like, any other ways we can get involved in what's going on with the upcoming legislation and future legislation?
Yeah, I mean, and I and Dr. Stewart, we're two people kind of running this organization. So, the other thing is if there is a story about homeschooling happening in your area, just again, about like kind of like legislative aspect of homeschooling, shoot it to us, tag us, let me know that's happening too, because it's a really important way that we can plug into a conversation. And I depend on the network of alumni that we have to make sure that I know, what's going on. Some of these things, again, they don't always make it to me, but I'm happy to support them. So as much as people want to plug us in, I am grateful for it.
Yeah. No, I think that's great, and I'm excited. Yeah, Dr. Jonah is coming on the show very soon. So yeah, so that's gonna be fun. We'll hear about their experience, and I think that's gonna be cool, and what they're doing for you guys, because I think like that's the other piece of what CRHE did, and the reasons like I started to fall in love with what you guys were doing was because I was like, there are all these resources around what is happening, like the invisible homeschool kid. It's like things like that, and being able to tap into those and look at those resources, or look at the data that you guys are collecting and actually like laying out in a way that makes sense, it's like, oh, okay, like there's a lot here. We've got generations after generations of homeschoolers now. I mean, we got kids of the, dating back potentially to like the 70s, of people who can talk about their homeschool experiences and how vastly different they have been in that stretch alone. But there's also that tie of that thing that ties us all together, which is being a homeschool kid. There's just this weird thing that like makes it all so we see each other, we hear each other, we like instantly understand. It's like a weird it's a superpower. I keep telling people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very cool. Well, Tess, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about like what's happening, the good things that have happened, some of the things that maybe died on the floor, but some of the reasons they did die, and how we can maybe change that in the future, things that are coming down the line, which is super exciting, and then how we can get involved, because I think that's the next piece is action. So yeah.
Definitely.
Anything else that we haven't touched on before I let you go?
No, I appreciate the time. I was like being able to echo the cause of the fact that legislative reform is needed in homeschooling, and responsible homeschooling needs these legislative guidelines. And so we are moving the needle forward this year. This truly is one of the first years we've seen the needle go towards the reform that we want, not away. And I'm just excited to keep the momentum going.
Good. And to the audience, you guys, links for all this stuff down below. Okay. So whether you want to support financially, whether you want to get involved in person, whether you just want to hear more about what like the coalition is doing, like please like get involved, check it out, see if it's for you, sign on to some things if that is sounding good to you. And yeah, until next time, we'll see ya. Peace.